When you need to build up your team to handle the growing chaos at work, use Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It gives your job post the boost it needs to be seen and helps reach people with the right skills, certifications, and more. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hiring hero? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
This episode is brought to you by Accenture. When your advertising operations fall out of sync, everything else follows. Spotify and Accenture are working together to reinvent the rhythm of ad sales, using automation, analytics, and smarter workflows to simplify campaign delivery and access better data across the business. The result? Less time spent on operations, more time connecting brands with the moments and fandoms that matter most. Learn more at accenture.com/Spotify.
Jaw-dropping. It's been talked about for millennia. Herodotus talked about it in 450 BC, and then hundreds of years later, Strabo, Pliny, Sir William Flinders Petrie did an excavation there in 1881. But he went down through the Roman level and then the Ptolemaic level, and that's as far as he went. And he said that there was water underneath, and so people have avoided excavating there because there happens to be a canal over the top, and they thought they were going to have to move the canal to do the excavation. And so everything ground to a halt in 2008. And then I ended up taking an interest in it again. Now, I've been looking for a deep, large underground complex for 25 years. And so I spent 5 years in and out of the tunnels inside on the Giza Plateau. And then I found a site that may have been it. And I led an expedition there in February 2012, and it turned out to be modern. It turned out to be a target for the Air Force. And then, so I kept having the past life memories and having people talk about a site that was really, really old and really deep. And it seemed to be all coming together in terms of the characteristic features that various psychic people I knew were referring to, but nobody could place it. So I thought, well, maybe we can do a satellite scan of this, but nobody had the coordinates of it. So I did the needle in the haystack on Google Earth and found the coordinates. And Klaus Dona called me 5 minutes after I found it, and I went, Klaus, I think I found something. And he said, send me the Google Earth file. And 2 days later, he started sending me impressions of what's down there at great depth. So this technology is state of the art, and it's able to look through layers. So the old GPR, ground penetrating radar, once it hit something, it couldn't look through it. And that's the beauty of this. And it has different signatures for bone and precious metals and all these different things. So they run a different scan based on the signature of what's down there. So there are a total of 82 chambers. On one side, there's two distinct levels. There's 31 chambers on one and 32 in the other. And then on a third construction on the other side of the canal. And these chambers are all on the one side bigger than the average size house, but 6 of them are bigger than the average size swimming pool. And there's 63 of these chambers and a kilometer and a half of tunnels to connect them. And the area on the edges of it is 81 football fields. And it's deep. So one level is more than 50 feet deep and one level is more than 120 feet deep. Well, this would be like burying a few airports. I don't think so. The chambers are far too big for that. The size of an Olympic-sized swimming pool, think about how big that is. I put it into metaphors because it was just inconceivable. And it took me about a week to measure it and then turn it into square footage and stuff. So it's just like, it's like a number of different Costco's. It's just so enormous and so deep that I don't think it is. We can't tell until we excavate. I don't know if it's even possible to get permits to excavate, even though there's been several attempts to apply, and that keeps changing about who, what, where, how. And so I've got 1 foot on the shore. I'm not sure if we'll actually get to go and dig. It's possible. But in the meantime, what's happening with other scans that have been done is in other countries, it's easier to get permits, and governments seem to understand that tourism is a good thing. And so wherever they've said they found water and the flow rate and the depth, when they go to dig, they're finding it. They found diamonds in Brunei and gold in Bolivia and oil and gas in various places, but the company with the scan doesn't want to encourage oil and gas because it's not good for the planet. But they found the entrance to the Bosnian pyramids. They found a number of different things with this scan, and it's very, very accurate. And there's a device that goes on site that makes it even more accurate. So I think it's pretty safe to say there's something really, really remarkable down there. Well, I met him at the Bosnian pyramids, and we were both speaking at the Hidden Mysteries conference. And he's honored there because he actually said the door to the tunnel chamber is right here. Now, Klaus was organizing exhibitions for museums. And several years ago, somebody sent him an out-of-place artifact exhibit. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, I'll have it for 3 months. I'll find out where each and every one of these things came from. And then, solve the mystery. And at the end of the 3 months, he said, nope, I don't know where any of this came from. So then he turned his attention to studying and investigating out-of-place artifacts. And in countries like Egypt and other places as well, if you're digging a well in your house in the Valley of the Kings or whatever, and you hit something and it's an artifact, you're trying to get water, the government will throw you in jail for stealing it and take your house. So when people find things, they certainly don't want to keep it, but they also don't want to call the government. So they're calling Klaus. And so what he leaves the things in situ or in a museum and takes photographs of them, but he's finding all these connections of a unified writing that went around the world, even finding this strange runic writing in the debris inside the tunnels of the Bosnian pyramids. So we're talking a lot of different places. So, and the other thing is that he's had a lot of trouble with dating because nobody wants anything to be older than 6,000 years in Peru, for example. Gotcha. And so he'd find something that he thought was several 100,000 years old, and it would come back, 4,820. And you don't have to pay, by the way, and they'd take over a year. So what's happening is the labs are corrupt, and they're not giving the real date. Yeah. So, you not only have, there's so much corruption and we live in a sea of lies. And what we're doing as truth seekers is looking to find some truth and some connections between these places. Yeah, it is super powerful. Now, what it is a live satellite scan. So it's high definition. But what his company has done is applied a software technology that is looking for the longitudinal waves. And it's technically put into Maxwell equations. And the common thing that we would recognize would be barcodes in a grocery store. Gotcha. Where they can say how many they've got on the shelf, the different everything and the price and all that. And so each element has a different signature. And so they run the scan for water. They run the scan for gold. They run the scan for bone and anomalies of chambers as well. So they can see if there's something in the chamber. So it's really quite fascinating. But the thing is that you still have to have the interface to then go and investigate, because in terms of research methodology, this is a hypothesis. This is something that could be, and then you've got to go and verify before you can say it's a quote unquote discovery. You have to do an excavation. And archaeology is a destructive science. So the place will never look the way it did. And that's what an archaeological dig is. But the other thing about archaeology is older is deeper. So this is so deep, it's going to be really old. And if you think about the pyramid code, measuring from the top of a pyramid to the Nile, this is 30 kilometers from the Nile. Mm-hmm. Sphinx is 8 miles from the Nile. Mm-hmm. Like, this has got to be really old if the Nile is that far. Well, you can say that to the government all you want, and they may or may not respond. But the interesting thing about this site, as far as I know, there's no pottery, which is just, we've got, as investigators, we've got to piece together this story as best we can. And so like Göbekli Tepe, that was also decommissioned like the Bosnian pyramids, filled up with rubble in anticipation of the flood. You see, a lot of this stuff is relating now. In anticipation of the flood, they decommissioned both Göbekli Tepe in Turkey and the tunnels underneath the Bosnian pyramids. Gotcha. And they didn't find any pottery at Göbekli Tepe. And so there's 22 temples, and they're all arranged in a circular kind of fashion with animal symbols, astrological sort of things. And so it seemed to be a place of worship at the top of a mountain, at the high up, and or some kind of ritual. And so, but this place, nothing connects. It doesn't connect up and down between the two levels at all. So that to me speaks of two distinct civilizations, two distinct groups that would have built it. And it's not a temple. It doesn't, like in the Egyptian temples, one room leads to the next until you get to the Holy of Holies at the back of the temple. And all those temples are made in a pattern that represent the cavities of the human body. And as you walk through, they open to each other. Well, these are more like separate individual rooms that don't connect. So that speaks to me of some kind of repository. Yes, but also that I've been working with this idea, and as I say, it's reflecting what more than several people have been coming to me over the years. There seems to be a light key technology or something going on down there in the places that these people are having their experiences, where they approach and it's dark, and as they move through, it lights up. And that there's something about the light signature that is allowing them in the psychic space to penetrate into these chambers. And apparently there's a lot of symbols on them, but some of them are empty without any symbols on them. So that's kind of like the Great Pyramid that would have been like an energy device. And so, I mean, it's mind-boggling, really, because I don't think we have within our framework anything that has looked like this before. Now, in a way, that's a blessing, because it's not the same old, so it may speak to something that we've all been looking for.
Sure.
But when you think about the dispersion of pottery technology in the whole Arabian Peninsula over 3,000 years, you see patterns. And so, there's archaeologists that have put this together over a long period of time. Frankincense and myrrh trade routes in the Arabian Peninsula, 4,000 years, where you go from place to place to place and find similar styles of pottery, similar kinds of encampments and everything. And so we can say, okay, this is known over this, and that's a longer period of time. 4,000 years is a long period of time. And you can say, okay, we've seen this before. But I think, the archaeologists are going to look and say, we've never seen anything like this.
When you need to build up your team to handle the growing chaos at work, use Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It gives your job post the boost it needs to be seen and helps reach people with the right skills, certifications, and more. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hiring hero? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
This episode is brought to you by Accenture. When your advertising operations fall out of sync, everything else follows. Spotify and Accenture are working together to reinvent the rhythm of ad sales, using automation, analytics, and smarter workflows to simplify campaign delivery and access better data across the business. The result? Less time spent on operations, more time connecting brands with the moments and fandoms that matter most. Learn more at accenture.com/Spotify.
Well, the only thing is the Supreme Council of Antiquities permit to excavate. And I have been in two different situations working on that. And there's 12 pages of guidelines. And the first point is no new permits to excavate will be granted in Upper Egypt. And in brackets, it says Giza to Abu Simbel, which is practically the whole country. And so apparently this place has an exception on it. But I know there's several teams over the past, that have tried to excavate there. Now, they had no idea that it was needed, the depth was needed, and there has been research done with ground penetrating radar where you lay the wires right on the sand. But nobody's gotten a permit yet, and the application process keeps going sideways. So apparently there's 35 new ministers coming in a couple of weeks, and apparently the minister in charge of this before, up until this point, has, basically been saying, no foreign missions, only Egyptian archaeologists. And it seems like the rules keep changing. They don't want people who already excavated there. And every time I hear something about it, it seems to have changed. So I was working on a list of archaeologists that would have had the experience in that area, in the field, to think on their feet and do the responsible kind of thing. And I was actually tasked with finding that. And it's hard to say. It's hard to say where it's at and how it's going to go. And so, like I say, I've had a foot on the shore. I think it's still important to know what's down there, whether or not, I mean, we can't force their hand. And I know it's for humanity. And the other reason I wanted to be involved was because of the aspect of filming it. Because any discovery can be buried, it can be twisted, it can be reported incorrectly. And so I wanted to be able to have a live camera there, show people and document it, that it's in my possession, and then I can show it. It is 95 kilometers south of Cairo, and it has a pyramid there. And as I said, it's got an irrigation canal over the top. And there's things that have been found all the way around the pyramid, but mostly in the upper levels, as I said. And so it's close to the Fayoum Oasis. So when you look at the map of Egypt, there's an upside down leaf, and it's in that area. And so but there's all kinds of legends though about a lake that was there, and pyramids on an island in the lake. And from that pyramid, and this is typical in Egypt, and you've seen it in the pyramid code, there's another pyramid about 20 miles away that you can see, which is astonishing because I wasn't expecting that at all.
Wow.
I did go there a few weeks ago, and I climbed to the top of the pyramid and, surveyed the site, and Klaus says there's no water down it, that there's a few puddles, I call them, underneath. And so that makes the idea of excavating a lot easier. So it's a large site that basically sits there by itself. It wasn't unknown to the ancients, but it kind of became unknown to us. But what was found there before is now in the Petrie Museum in London. And Flinders Petrie put it online. So there's wooden sarcophagi, and they would paint the face of the deceased on the sarcophagus itself. So I'm told these are the oldest realistic portraits of humans that we have. They're not stylized. They look like the person. So that's an interesting thing in itself. But why would the Anthony Cleopatra time frame go there and Roman go there and build a little village over the top? Well, because the site was known. It came down through an oral tradition. And then, so 4 distinct layers at different levels. It's fascinating. From an archaeological standpoint, it's fascinating. The thing, though, is that he worked from 1881 to 1891, so 10 years of digging in Egypt. But archaeology didn't start till 1910. I studied archaeology at the graduate level, and basically in terms of it being a science, it hadn't even started yet. And so he did a very good job, I think, of documenting and making drawings. And that's how I found the site and aligned it with Google Earth. It was his map. So I just kept on looking for the characteristics. I couldn't tell the difference between the roads and the canals at first. And I literally took me 2 days, needle in a haystack, but I found it. Cleopatra's time was 75 BC, 79 BC, and Herodotus was 450 BC. So because we've compressed time, and, the Bible and school wants us to think we're 6,000 years old, it's hard for us to, to think back in these chunks of time. But to me, the most fascinating part is everybody who wrote about it couldn't possibly have been speaking to each other because they're too distant in time. Well, we drove to the lake, and it was 40 kilometers away, the lake. But I had never been there, to this Lake Moeris. It's called Moeris. And it's astounding. It's salt water, and it's enormous, absolutely enormous. And so it is about geological time. There's also people and old maps that talk about the water going all the way to Giza, and there being a relationship between Giza and this site. I'm like, wait a minute, that's a lot of water. And that precludes the Nile. But then, when we're talking these huge geological timescapes, it may make sense. I mean, when Antoine Gigal started talking about Giza being an island, I just rejected that completely. I just couldn't imagine how that would work. If the Band of Peace is going along the Nile, how can Giza be an island? And so there's still some big questions there, because I can't imagine that whole region being covered in water. And so there's some work to do in terms of, digging into the geological record as well to see if it's even possible. But it changes things if it was, because when Edgar Cayce talks about being below the left paw of the Sphinx, and some people say right paw, and then I started saying beneath because it's in front of and beneath, because the plateau is anything but flat. But if you just go straight south, south, where are we going here? Yeah, that's south. Okay, so that would be, so this site is south of the Giza Plateau. So who knows? Who knows? We'll see. But I mean, I'm not going to leave this alone. I'm going to continue to investigate and find out whatever I can, from a theoretical standpoint. If the opportunity arises to actually be on the dig, I'm happy to go. They're not connected in any way, and they are 60 feet apart. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And they don't look, I've been staring at these scans for a couple of months now.
Yeah.
And they don't look like the same. And the interesting thing is when I plotted the actual size of the rooms and made charts about it in Excel, none of the chambers were the same size. They look almost like a scale. So 32 on one level, 31 on the other, almost like a major and a minor scale. So there may be something to the size and shape of the rooms that spoke to their function. So I don't think it can be a temple. I don't think it was ever above ground and it filled in like the Sphinx would fill up to its neck. So it wasn't a place anybody lived. It wasn't a place anybody did ritual, I don't think. And so I think it's two different time frames. So of course people want me to speculate with what I know. And so I say that in 1973, I did my first past life regression, even though I'd had past life memories. And the first thing the regressionist said to me was that I had been on an evacuation committee when they already knew that Atlantis was going to sink.
Sure.
Or a big disaster was coming. And so that's what's fueled, that's one of the incarnations that's fueled my desire to find these things. And like I said, 25 years of this. And so I think if it was you and me and 10 other people and, we're there around a boardroom table saying, well, what are we going to do? What are we going to do with our stuff, our technology, the people? How do we relocate? Where's the impact going to be? Is there anywhere that's going to be safe? Or is this just going to be a total worldwide calamity? So the other thing is that happened in Atlantis 3 times. There are ancient texts available out there that speak of a prophecy of Atlantis going down. So I don't think the first time that they knew how to predict. The second time, the disaster, I'm told, 17,500 BC. The third one is all documented on the calendar of catastrophes on the ceiling of the Temple of Dendera, and that's 13,660 years ago. And Svetlana Pavlova deciphered what those messages were, both the round zodiac at Dendera and the first hypostyle hall. And it's very clear once you understand what's going on these codes, you can see that before the flood and after the flood. So this upper layer of the two, I call it the blue layer, could have been one of those disasters in Atlantis. So I think that the decision was to colonize various places on the planet and build these straight-sided functional pyramids that were actually on the telluric lines of the earth, and they're functional energy machines. And so again, we've missed a lot of this because if it was pre-diluvial, then the silt from the flood would have been on top of the straight-sided pyramids and plenty of it, 3-4 feet deep, to be able to grow trees there. And so there's pyramids in South Africa. We've seen them, Bosnia, Serbia, 3 new ones in Ecuador,
Wow.
Alaska,
Peru.
Peru, Gunung Padang. I mean, there are pyramids that are showing up and China that are covered in trees. And so because the trees are all different heights, when you look from a distance, it doesn't look straight-sided, and excavation is, a very lengthy process. And so it stands to reason that these pyramids would have been put there before the flood, and that it could have easily been a worldwide calamity. But that doesn't mean that everybody died. We see the Cave of the Swimmers in the English Patient, and some people would have swam to the high plateau at Gilf Kabir, for example, in Egypt, and then start again to say, okay, where's Sirius, where's Orion, and measure up and start to track the stars. And so the first thing they would have done is try to orient themselves. Where are we in the solar system? Where are we in the galaxy? And it's the same thing as here. If the grid went down and we're living in cold conditions, we don't stay in our house. We go find somewhere we can build a fire to keep warm. We're walking around with the shirt on our back and hopefully something warm. And it's not that we didn't have technology the day before. It's that the grid went down, right? Starting over. Well, and you even said it, it's the Atlantis myth. And it doesn't matter how much evidence we're finding and, linking it to a very advanced civilization that no doubt would have been seeded by advanced beings from before. I think that this is it here, is it here, is it here? If you watch documentaries, and there's plenty of them on Atlantis, it seems like they want to debunk a lot of different places. And they say, well, if they didn't find elephants, it's not really there. I mean, it's really, really, really like the worst kind of academic dissing of things. So my conviction is it was a worldwide seafaring culture. They built their cities in the same style because it was seafaring. And there are circular cities that have been found underwater, above water, and all of that. So when you say Bimini, just off the Straits of Gibraltar, the Azores, the High Altiplano in South America, I say all of the above.
When you need to build up your team to handle the growing chaos at work, use Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It gives your job post the boost it needs to be seen and helps reach people with the right skills, certifications, and more. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hiring hero? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
This episode is brought to you by Accenture. When your advertising operations fall out of sync, everything else follows. Spotify and Accenture are working together to reinvent the rhythm of ad sales, using automation, analytics, and smarter workflows to simplify campaign delivery and access better data across the business. The result? Less time spent on operations, more time connecting brands with the moments and fandoms that matter most. Learn more at accenture.com/Spotify.
Atlantis covered the world, and the place where the asteroid hit or where there was a weakness in the continental plates is, maybe where the epicenter of the thing was, and that the main city called Poseidon went down there. But, you can go straight up the mountains, the Alpujarras, and then up the Sierra Nevadas right there, and Spain, where it's a half-hour ferry ride to Morocco. Now, these circular cities, the ships would come in and turn left and go around and stop and drop off their cargo and get more and keep going in the same direction counterclockwise and out the other side. And so, well, maybe they went around the other way. I mean, my conviction is it went around. I don't even know why I say they went around counterclockwise, but the point is kind of like the restrooms at the airport where you've got your wheelie bag, and maybe that's why, because we go left and then come out right. And then, everybody keeps circulating, but that's the metaphor for these ships. And everything was about, they were able to be at sea for a long time. They had desalination technology. They were able to grow fruits and vegetables right on the boats. And so it wasn't like, people getting scurvy and people getting lost. They basically spent, their culture was all about moving around the planet on ships. No pun intended. Sinking in.
Yeah.
But the thing too is like, who seeded them? Okay. So I'm saying, and I'm saying this, linking it to past life recall. And of course, I'm not sure, but it makes sense. And it, because I've been looking for it, I feel a sense of satisfaction that this could be something like that. But what about before that? And how did the Atlanteans develop all this technology? Did they have ancestors that made them wise and gave them building techniques and all of that, and sacred geometry and astronomy and all that? And I think that makes sense. So for all the UFOs came and the Sitchin 450,000 years ago, they came and enslaved us. I think, and having a PhD in linguistics, I understand how the slightest turn of phrase, in Chinese, they sit in a chair, we sit on a chair. These little things can change a whole meaning. But they say we were enslaved. Well, what's the purpose of that? Does that make us think we're not enslaved now? They were more enslaved 450,000 years ago, and we're so lucky now. Anyway, Sitchin was making declarations, but perhaps something did happen 450,000 years ago. Fair enough. And everyone, lots of people are really curious about disclosure and finally getting the story out about, but I also think we make a mistake there where, we're in cars, scooters, bicycles, whatever. So we're kind of into the vehicle idea. So we place in our unconscious or whatever, that the aliens are in spaceships. But, how else could they have come here? Could they have shapeshifted? Did they need reorientation chambers? Did they have to put their equipment somewhere? And so, we haven't really situated that. Because we haven't had full disclosure, and because we don't really know how to trace things that old, because we've compressed everything into the last 6,000 years of patriarchal time, we're kind of at a loss. But and we don't know what's down there. Like if we were able to do a borehole and put the 3D camera around and see what's really on the walls, and even nothing on the walls would be interesting. Mm-hmm. Why are these chambers so big? What are they for? But there's been talk over time, and there's people like in the Keys of Enoch and Enochian magic, that talk about preserving equipment needing reorientation. There is talk of this. It sounds legendary, but how can we put these pieces together to actually make sense? Of course, we won't be sure. We may still not be sure even after an excavation, but I think it speaks to the idea of like a storage repository from a very, very old culture. So in 1996, I was at the Star Visions conference in Santa Fe, and a woman named Chelsea Floor was speaking, and she put up this chart, and they said it was the Great Pyramid. And these two gentlemen went 2/3 of the way up on the west face of the Great Pyramid, is what they said. And then they did this abracadabra kind of mantra, and a rock moved, and it revealed a passage that went down, 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 staircases, down so far. I remember reading this then in 96 and feeling just creepy about how musty and dusty and old everything sounded and how far they had to go. So if you think the Great Pyramid's 386 feet high, and they went down, down, down below the Earth's surface, and then they arrived to this perfectly clean, well-lit series of huge rooms. And so, I mean, this is a dramatic story. I was absolutely riveted to this story. I could not put it down till I read the whole thing. And I really felt like I was tapping into something I knew, or resonated with or whatever. And what they talked about are these discs, that had chips out of them that sounded like they were cogs in a bigger machine or some kind of a computer, huge. Wow. They were large. And then they talked about these different codes and equipment. And that as they moved between the rooms, they lit up. They also talked about these portholes, which, let's not confuse the word, but these round kind of windows that they felt like someone was watching them. And that maybe it connected to something that was, inner earth, or who knows? I mean, this is all really weird stuff. But I thought, well, how clever. All they had to do is say it was the Great Pyramid, and then no one would go looking because it wasn't really the Great Pyramid. So that's all you have to do to code your work. And so much stuff says it's the Great Pyramid, and perhaps, a lot of it isn't. So it's, I'm not saying that there aren't that there isn't a huge network of passageways under Giza, which, if you can think about it, over the millennia, no one has ever excavated. No one. They're not allowed to. And Zahi cemented over a lot of it to the left side of the Sphinx, because I've got a picture from 1910 that shows a temple of Isis at the ground. The top of it was at the ground level. So that no doubt would have been underground. So, there's a lot. And all the way from Abu Raush down to Saqqara at least, and I suspect to Dashur, is a network of these passageways. Mm-hmm. But it didn't happen to be the only place, and it didn't happen to be the place I was looking for. So after 5 years of supervised time in and out of those holes, I concluded that this isn't it. There's something down there, but not what I'm looking for. Think about the pyramids were designed to withstand anything. And it's known in Atlantis that there were 3 worldwide catastrophes. Okay. And so, and a great distance apart. So they would, they wouldn't necessarily be connected. And there's time in the precessional cycle of 26,000 years to be in a golden age and then a iron age. So to be totally refined and then totally, opposed each other, fighting, warring, that kind of thing. But a pyramid the construction of these straight-sided pyramids, which is repeated, I'm not talking step pyramids, flat top pyramids, I'm talking the straight-sided pyramids, that they have passageways underground, they have water underground, but the way they're constructed is on a shallow inverted pyramid, so that if you can just, hold your hands up, at just a slight angle with your palms facing up. And so what would happen is these large blocks of stone, if there was an earthquake or even a flood, they would shake themselves tighter. So instead of breaking apart, any kind of, earthquake, flood, that kind of impact of an asteroid or something would cause the pyramids to be stronger, not weaker. How clever is that? Well, exactly. And you keep coming back to it makes sense. Well, that's what we're looking to, we're still, way out in trying to find something that's plausible. But these pyramids have similar structure. And there's 7 different characteristics that make them energy machines, and they were strategically placed. And yeah, how were they built? It seems to me that they had, anti-gravity devices, sound and light technology, and using geopolymers, poured stone. So taking broken pieces of granite, for example, or sandstone, and then putting them in with natron. So Joseph Davidovich has talked about this, and I think it's quite conclusive. And so natron is what they used in mummification to dry the organs out, and it took 70 days, which is the amount of time that Sirius disappears, 70 days beneath the horizon, and then it's got the heliacal rising. So they were drying out this cement, if you will, and when they analyze a poured granite block and a carved granite block, they can't tell the difference once the thing is dried. So it seems that they were pouring the stone. And this speaks to Machu Picchu and to Abu Roche, that's up a mountain first. So, how do you get the stone? It's one thing to get the stone up the pyramid, but to get it up the mountain before you get it up the pyramid, now that's talking a whole different thing. But in terms of building the pyramids the way we're told, what do you do when you're at the top? If you're pulling it with levers and all that, and you get to the top of the pyramid, where does everybody stand to put the stone? It seems much, much more logical that they were able to pour the stones in situ and then remove the frame.
Wow.
Now, I think I'm concluding as well, I haven't heard anybody else say this, that the temple walls with the frescoes were also poured. So the construction of the temple, the pillars, the walls themselves is one thing, but then there's a layer over the top that has the decorative bits and the gods and goddesses and the hieroglyphic and that sort of thing. And it took me a long, long time to notice this, going to Egypt as many times as I have, 29 times, and living over there for a couple of years. At Kamumbo, the passageway that goes to the little chambers at the back behind the Holy of Holies has Hapi and Isis with blue lotus draped over their arms. And there's like a procession going all the way back, but it comes the other way as well. And it's the same, but there's another temple that has the same. So they would have used the same molds in more than one place. And you also see places where that separates off and falls down. And then you see the back, the what's holding it up on the pillar or the temple wall. So that's how they ended up discovering those helicopters, and the helicopter and the flying machines at Abydos was someone had covered it up, and then the lintel fell down.
When you need to build up your team to handle the growing chaos at work, use Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It gives your job post the boost it needs to be seen and helps reach people with the right skills, certifications, and more. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hiring hero? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
This episode is brought to you by Accenture. When your advertising operations fall out of sync, everything else follows. Spotify and Accenture are working together to reinvent the rhythm of ad sales, using automation, analytics, and smarter workflows to simplify campaign delivery and access better data across the business. The result? Less time spent on operations, more time connecting brands with the moments and fandoms that matter most. Learn more at accenture.com/Spotify.
Yeah, and then it was underneath. So there's been layers and layers and layers in Egypt as well. But I do think that but the other thing about the pyramids is that they are functional energy machines, if you will, but it's based on the quartz crystal and the double helix of it under pressure. So I'll send you some photographs, actually, some film strips that show that in the so-called dead or empty places, that's the wrong word, of the pyramid, that there are, like, Valery Uvarov built a functional pyramid, and in Siberia, in the center of the landmass there. And the premise is the double quartz helix, and all of this is part of my new series, The New Atlantis.
Wow.
Under pressure, that gives the energy generating in there, and it has to do with quartz. So all of the stones inside are quartz based, and then he's got all these quartz crystals that are like 14 feet high. I mean, there's a photograph in there where there's people standing next to it. The quartz crystals taller than them, much taller than them. And so that's how he did it. And he used crushed crystal polymer, white and black and white and black, going around like the arms of the galaxy. So the inverted pyramid first, and then this spiral black, white that's representing the galaxy. Then these big pyramids, and then the poured stone over the top. And the casing stone was almost like that fondant, I don't know what you call it, the icing that you would put on a cake that then kind of sets and kind of becomes a little hard. So they poured on this, and I saw the pyramid before and after they put these casing stones on, crushed quartz polymer, and it finished shiny and flat, translucent. And then they literally took a big quartz pyramidion for the top. And so this machine, it works. It has energetic effects that have been measured. People have spontaneous healings in there, and it's operational now. And the idea is they're putting in the canals around this first pyramid, and I can see it from Google Earth. I've located it, and then the waterways go around, and then 4 pyramids around that, another set of waterways, and 4 pyramids around that. So I don't know if they finished building those other 8 pyramids as part of the complex, but the idea is it's called Project 12, and they have all this high-level technology in different domains, education, technology, communication, like that.